In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So God willing, we're going to start a new series studying the book of First Maccabees. So again, the book of First Maccabees, like Tobit, like we studied before, is one of the deuterocanonical books, which means that it's not present in the Hebrew Masoretic text or Hebrew Old Testament. It's found in the translation from the original Hebrew into Greek, which is called the Septuagint translation. So this is something that is accepted by the Orthodox Church as a canonical book, just like all the other books of the Bible, but it was removed from the Old Testament canon by the Jews. So, but we accept it, and we have very early translations of it from before Christ that was actually found as part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and so it's all preserved for us, and we have kind of evidence that it is authentic and found from the very early church. It was accepted and it was used. So this book happens in the time which is called the Intertestamental period. The intertestamental period is the time that's between the end of what we traditionally consider to be the Old Testament. The last book was the book of Malachi, and then the beginning of the New Testament and the Gospels. Okay, so this is describing to us events that happen in history and can actually be corroborated with history of things that happen in between the two testaments, between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So at the beginning, I'm going to give some overview and historical context so we can kind of understand what period of history this was and what happened during this time. And one of the really nice things about this is you can kind of see both prophecies being fulfilled, okay, in kind of the history, and you see how this is corresponding to actual like historical history that we can study and understand. This is not something that's just kind of in isolation, but we can see the actual historical events that are recorded taking place here and in the lead up here to this book. Okay, so to give you kind of a background, okay, here we have a picture of what the Greek Empire looked like immediately after the death of Alexander the Great. Okay, so essentially, Alexander the Great, he was the son of King Philip, who was Macedonian, and he had, in the life of Alexander the Great, he had conquered essentially the entire world as being his empire. Okay, this is the Greek Empire. And when it came time for his death, he had no heir. He had no one to inherit this, to become the emperor after him. So it was decided that the kingdom was going to be divided among four of his generals, like four of his top generals. So it divided up into four kingdoms. Okay, and that's important because that sets the context for this book of First Maccabees. So, but before we talk about that, I want to talk about a little earlier. Okay, we read some prophecies in the book of Daniel chapter 2, okay, that starts to lead us into the historical context of how do we get to where we are now, okay, in history. So in Daniel chapter 2, where you might be familiar with a vision that King Nebuchadnezzar saw. The King Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. He saw a vision of a statue. Do you know this statue? What was this statue? What was it composed of?
A head of gold?
It had a head of gold, this statue that he saw in a vision, okay, and?
Chest of bronze?
The chest of silver, okay, and then the next thing, the belly and the thighs of bronze, and then legs of iron, okay, and then the feet were partly iron and partly clay. So you had a statue, the head was made of gold, the chest was made of silver, the legs were made of iron. Sorry, what did I say? Head of gold, chest of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and then the feet were iron and clay. Okay? This symbolized different kingdoms that were to come after King Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? So essentially, God was revealing to King Nebuchadnezzar what was going to take place after him, and Daniel the prophet is the one who interpreted this vision for him. Okay, and so this is how it was understood. The head of gold represents Babylon, which is King Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. He was the king of Babylon, and it was like the greatest of the kingdoms. Okay, then after him, he was conquered by the Medo-Persian Empire, okay? And this is represented by the chest of silver. This is like the next, so silver is a little less than gold, and so this is not as glorious an empire as the Babylonian Empire. The next after that was the belly and the thighs of bronze, okay? This represents the Greek Empire, okay? And then the legs of iron represents the Roman Empire. So those are kind of, in history, those are the sequences of the major empires of the world, okay? You had the Babylonian Empire, which was taken over by the Medo-Persian Empire, which then was taken over by the Greek Empire, which was then taken over by the Roman Empire, right? So if we read in the New Testament, for instance, which empire was the one in power at the time? The Roman Empire, okay? But before them, it was the Greek Empire, okay? So the setting here in 1st Maccabees is during the time of the Greek rule, okay? It was during the time of the Greek rule. The final empire, which was of the feet of the statue, which was partly iron and partly clay, there's different opinions of what this represents. Some say it represents Europe. Some say it represents like division in the Roman Empire that came later. And some say it represents the kingdom of the Antichrist because it's divided, okay? There's partly iron and partly clay. And then in the vision, the very last thing that happens is the stone comes and it destroys the entire statue. Okay, and that stone represents the kingdom of God. Okay, because Christ is the head cornerstone. He is the stone that is greater in the kingdom that is greater than all of the earthly kingdoms. Okay, so that's one vision from Daniel chapter 2 that begins to set the context of this book and what we're going to read. The other important vision, okay, that we read also in the book of Daniel, which is Daniel chapter 8. Okay, it's there is a vision that Daniel sees which represents and shows the demise of the Medo-Persian Empire. Remember, the Medo-Persian Empire is the empire that came after the Babylonians and before the Greek. Okay, so the Medo-Persians were conquered by the Greek. Okay, and so Daniel is again prophesying and seeing in the future that this is something that was going to happen. So what does he see? He sees that there is a ram, like a goat, a ram with two horns. Okay. And one horn is longer than the other horn, okay, in this vision, okay? One of the horns represents the Medes, and one of the horns represents the Persians. So again, the Medo-Persian Empire in itself was actually composed of two different empires, like merged together. One was more powerful than the other. Then he sees there's another goat, okay, that comes from the west, that has a single horn between its eyes, a single horn between its eyes. And this horn represents Alexander the Great. Okay, the goat then kills the ram. So this goat coming with a single horn between its eyes kills the ram, which again represents the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay, but its large horn was broken off, right? So this represents what? Alexander the Great, who is the ruler, the emperor of the Greek Empire, he comes and destroys the Medo-Persian Empire, but in this, the horn gets broken off, meaning Alexander the Great dies. So he conquers, Alexander the Great conquered the whole world. He conquers the Medo-Persian Empire, but in this process, he's going to die. Then, we read in the same chapter, in Daniel chapter 8, verse 22, this single horn is replaced with four horns. Okay, it says, as for the broken horn and the four that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power. Okay, this prophecy was 250 years before the reign of Alexander the Great. And it was prophesying 250 years before Alexander the Great that Alexander the Great was going to conquer the Medo-Persian Empire and he was going to die, and that there was going to be 4 kingdoms that arise in his place, which is exactly what happened. When he died, he had no heir, so it was the kingdom was given to 4 of his top generals, and they were broken up into, the kingdom was broken up essentially into 4, okay? So who were his generals, okay? And who were these 4 kingdoms? The first general, his name was Lysimachus, okay? And he took over Asia Minor. So you see Asia Minor. Asia Minor is Turkey, okay? So that is here, okay? And then the next one, Cassander. Sorry, no, that's not here. That is... Yes, this one. Yes, this is Asia Minor right there, okay? The next one, Cassander, took Macedonia and Greece. Okay, that's over here, this green one. Ptolemy took Egypt and Palestine. That's this one. Okay. And then the last one, Seleucus, took Syria, Babylon, Persia, and India, essentially everything else. That's this one over here. Okay? So that's the four main empires that were created after Alexander the Great. Okay. Later on, they warred with each other, and there was more stuff that happened, and essentially some of them took over other parts of the others, and so on. But essentially, that's kind of the state the things were in when we start the book of First Maccabees. Okay. So the Seleucid Empire, which right now you see here is the blue. Okay. You're not even seeing my mouse, are you?
No.
So the
Is it pointer?
yeah. Hold on, let me turn it on. Okay, see that?
Nice.
Okay, so this Seleucid Empire here, okay, in the blue, okay, later on takes control of this area here, which includes Israel. Okay, so in the beginning of the book of First Maccabees, the Seleucid Empire is the one that has control over Israel. Okay, and as we said, the original ruler of the Seleucid Empire, his name was Seleucus. Okay, but at the time of First Maccabees, the leader, his name is Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Okay, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Okay. One characteristic of Greek culture is they love their culture, and they want to spread their culture everywhere. Okay, and this is called Hellenization. Hellenization means, like the word Hellen coming from like Helen of the Greeks. Hellenization means to spread the Greek influence around. So they would go and they would spread the Greek influence around all over the world. This is at this point is when Greek became like the language that was spoken the most in the world. Kind of like English is spoken the most now. At the time it was Greek. Okay, and so when it came to Israel, they wanted to spread their language, they wanted to spread their culture, they wanted to spread everything, their religions, their mythology, everything like that. And so they started to prevent the Jews from practicing their religion. Okay? And so even the name of Antiochus Epiphanes means God manifest. Okay? So he considers himself to be kind of like a god. Okay, and he is manifest. And he begins to act like a god. And you're going to see here in the first chapter, we're going to just get through the first chapter today, that in the way that he acts, the very domineering way that he is, and he forces the Jews to give up the sacrifices, to give up their, all the laws of God, the laws of Moses, the Ten Commandments, everything, and begin to adopt Greek culture. And so there was a group of Jews that were very much for this. Like they were like, this is like a positive thing. They actually went out and wanted this to happen. Then there was a group of Jews that, essentially just were martyrs. Okay, they didn't do anything, but when Antiochus came on them and his men came on them, they continued to practice faithfully what they knew, and they just allowed themselves to be martyred for what it is that they believe. And then there was a third group, and this third group is what wanted to mount a resistance. Okay, and essentially this is the family of the Maccabees. This is why we call it the book of Maccabees. The name Maccabees comes from the name of this family that essentially, starting from their father's name was Matthias, and then one of the main characters, his son's name was Judas Maccabees. These people were like the main focus of the book that mounted a resistance, like having faith in God, that God was going to expel these people and that God was able to restore them again, and so they wouldn't have to, one, be slaughtered, and two, give in and worship the way that they want them to worship. Okay? Any questions about the historical context so far? So we're going to get ready to start reading it. Okay. And it happened afterwards that Alexander, the son of Philip the Macedonian, so again that's King Philip, and Alexander here is Alexander the Great. Alexander, the son of Philip the Macedonian, who first reigned in Greece, having come from the land of Kittim, struck Darius, the king of the Persians and the Medes. So remember, we said the Greek Empire overcame the Medo-Persian Empire. Alexander the Great destroyed the Medo-Persians, and Darius was the king of the Medo-Persians. Actually, we read about King Darius in the book of Daniel, okay, that he was one of the kings. One of the really nice things about this book is it ties in things from other books as well as historical context when you really understand what's going on. He appointed many battles, and he took hold of all the fortifications, and he executed the kings of the earth, and he passed through even to the ends of the earth. And he received the spoils of many nations, and the earth was silenced in his sight. And he gathered together power and an exceedingly strong army, and he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up, and he captured the regions of nations and of sovereign leaders, and they became tributaries to him. And after these things he fell down on his bed, and he knew that he would die. And he called his servants, nobles who were raised with him from his youth, and he divided his kingdom to them while he was still alive. And Alexander reigned 12 years, and then he died. And his servants obtained his kingdom, each one in his place. And they all put diadems on themselves after his death. Do you know what a diadem is? Crown. And their sons after them for many years, and evils were multiplied on the earth. And there went forth from among them a sinful root, Antiochus the illustrious, the son of King Antiochus, who had been a hostage at Rome. So his father was Antiochus III, and he was Antiochus IV. And remember, he is now ruling over which kingdom? The Seleucid kingdom. Okay. And he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. In those days there went forth from Israel sons of iniquity, and they persuaded many, saying, Let us go and negotiate a covenant with the Gentiles that are all around us. For since we have withdrawn from them, many evils have found us. Okay, what does this mean? What is happening? Who are these sons of iniquity? Jews, right? And what are the Jews doing?
They're trying to make a deal with the Gentiles who've invaded their land.
Right. Okay. And was that seen as something good or bad?
Based on sons of iniquity, I would say bad.
Bad. Okay. So essentially they're trying to make a compromise, but the compromise that they're wanting to make is something that is against the commandments of God. Okay. There's nothing wrong with making compromises of culture. Actually, even we see in the New Testament that the early church had to make many compromises of culture. When the Gentiles began to enter into the church, there was all this question of, should people be circumcised or not, or what of the Jewish culture are we going to preserve and what should not be preserved, and all of that. And it was it was changed, and all of the people coming from the Greeks and the Romans and the other Gentiles, they did not practice Jewish culture. So the issue was not related to the culture, it was related to the law of God and the things that God had commanded. Now remember, at this point in time, God had commanded the Jews not to even affiliate, to talk to eat with, associate with the Gentiles by any means. So the simple idea that they're going to go and negotiate a covenant with the Gentiles is in itself unlawful, right? Because God wants to preserve the Jewish people, to be a consecrated people to him, to prepare them for the coming of the Messiah, right? The Messiah is we're talking about only a couple hundred years before the Messiah comes, okay? So he's wanting to prepare them to be a place where the Messiah will come, and like a fruitful ground, where now the Messiah will come and the people can believe in him and have faith in him, and the church can grow. So God is not wanting the people to dilute themselves with the Gentile culture, to lose their identity. And when I mean identity, I don't just mean their cultural identity, I mean their faith. To lose their faith and to live like Gentiles. So these people, though, you can imagine the kind of Jews that would go do this, they were pretty secular Jews. They're going to be the kind of people that they might be Jewish by name, but they don't have a strong sense of their faith. They don't have a strong sense of what they believe or the importance of it. And so for them, it was much easier and much better to say, we just want to go and make peace, so we're going to just give them what they want and concede in order for them to preserve us. Now, and the Greeks, they did not want to go and destroy all of the peoples that they conquered, but they wanted them to conform to their culture. Okay. And the word seemed good in their eyes. And some of the people determined to do this. And they went to the king, and he gave them the power to act according to the justice of the Gentiles. So essentially, these people, they went to who? They went to Antiochus, okay? And he approved of what they wanted to do, and he gave them authority. right? He gave them authority and said, go and act according to the justice of the Gentiles. So almost like they became rulers now, like rulers according to the government of the Greek Empire, that they are now coming to kind of establish a new order in Israel, right? Which is very difficult to be accepted. It's not something that can be easily accepted by any means. Okay, so keep that in mind. And they built a sports arena in Jerusalem, according to the laws of the nations, and they made themselves uncircumcised, and they withdrew from the holy covenant, and they were joined to the nations, and they were sold into evil doing. Okay, what strikes you about this verse?
The sports arena thing.
The sports arena, right? Because you can kind of see, well, okay, God wants them to be circumcised, so they were uncircumcised. They withdrew from the covenant of God, okay? They joined themselves to the Gentiles, which they shouldn't do. They were sold into evil doing. Okay, all of that is clear, like is wrong. But building a sports arena, why is that here?
Isn't it like the Greek Empire, the Colosseum, and the gladiators and stuff? It just kind of goes that same, just distract.
Yeah, so the sports arena, there wasn't just kind of like, NBA or anything like we have now. Okay, it was like they would have like death sports. Okay, it's one. They would also like do things, very lewd things. Like there would be like nude wrestling and all kinds of stuff. Even St. John Chrysostom, when he was speaking in the early church to the believers, he told them, don't participate in the sports activities for that reason. Okay, even like other entertainment, all the entertainments really of the Greeks and the Romans, they had some kind of lewd component in them. He told them, for instance, don't go to the circus for the same reason. So we might think in our mind like we have a certain idea when we think of sports, but it was different back then. So the idea of building a sports arena in Jerusalem is like essentially declaring Jerusalem to be a Gentile city. It's like we do what the Gentiles do. We live like the Gentiles live. We have abandoned our law. We have abandoned our faith. We've abandoned our moral code. We've abandoned the Ten Commandments, the laws of Moses, everything. And now our whole focus is on doing these activities, which are one, kind of just a diversion and distraction, and also sinful. Okay.
I talked about it in a sermon before, like relating it to the scary movies, like it desensitizes the death.
Oh, when it comes to like death games and death. Yeah, so some people like wonder like when we talk about like horror movies and violence and like what is the real harm of it. So horror movies and things that are horror in general, what they do is they give us an experience of what death is, but without any of the danger. So we feel like safe, but at the same time we're being exposed to all these images of death that makes us take them lightly. Like, when you see skulls and you see blood and gore and all this stuff, and it's just taken lightly. Like, there's no bad consequences that really happen to you, but you're always seeing it all the time. What it does is it makes us feel like death is not something that we should be afraid of. Whereas death is something we should be afraid of. I mean, death is something we should be very cognizant of and feeling like this is something very serious. And so when we realize that death is serious, and when we realize that there will be a day that will come and we will die, we sober up and we take things seriously. But if all the images of death that are designed to make me fear, to make me take my life seriously, if those things no longer move me, if those things no longer create in me a sense of concern, then maybe this thing that God has given to us to make us want to take life more seriously, it's all diluted. Like I don't feel that anymore. And so I'm not moved to take real action. It's just kind of I take death lightly and I don't do anything. And the kingdom was ready in the sight of Antiochus, and he began to reign over the land of Egypt, so he might reign over two kingdoms. So remember, Egypt was taken over by one of the other generals. Do you remember his name? Ptolemy. Okay, Ptolemy. And later the name Ptolemy became a title for any king of Egypt. So whenever you read about Ptolemy, right, it doesn't mean that necessarily that king's name is Ptolemy. Ptolemy became like a title. Okay, so here. Like I said, these four kingdoms, they didn't just remain kind of separate, but they started to fight with one another. Okay, so he's trying to take over also a second kingdom, which was the one of Egypt.
Was this the same Antiochus who sacrificed a pig on the altar?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're going to read about all the stuff he does. Yeah. So this first chapter really does a great job of setting up the problem, like setting up the damage and the magnitude of how the entire Israel society is being destroyed. Like it's one thing when you take people into exile and you put them far away, and now you're living according to their rules. But here, what they're doing is they're changing the rules in your own country. So in some sense it's even more of an offense because, for instance, it's not just that they're destroying the temple, but they're desecrating it. So we're going to see that. And he entered into Egypt with an oppressive multitude, with swift chariots and elephants and horsemen, and a great abundance of ships. And he appointed a war against Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, and Ptolemy was filled with dread before his face, and he fled, and many fell down wounded. And he took hold of the fortified cities in the land of Egypt, and he received the spoils of the land of Egypt. And Antiochus turned back after he struck Egypt in the 143rd year, and he ascended against Israel. And he ascended to Jerusalem with an oppressive multitude. And he entered into the sanctuary with arrogance, and he took the golden altar, and the lampstand of light, and all the vessels, and the table for the bread of the presence, and the vessels of libation, and the vials, and the little mortars of gold, and the veil, and the crowns, and the golden ornament, which was at the face of the temple, and he crushed them all. Like all the things that God had specifically told Moses, okay, back in the book of Numbers. And he told him all these details in the book of Exodus, all the details of how he should make all these things and the exact dimensions and all that. God is like, Antiochus is taking all those things, he's like crushing them, he's destroying them. And he took the silver and gold and the precious vessels, and he took the hidden treasures which he found. And having taken all these things away, he departed into his own land. And he caused a massacre of men, and he was speaking with great arrogance. And there was a great wailing in Israel and in all of their places. And the leaders and elders mourned, and the virgins and young men became weak, and the splendor of the women was changed. Every bridegroom took up lamentation, and those who sat in the marriage bed mourned, and the land shook on behalf of the inhabitants in it, and the entire house of Jacob was clothed with confusion. After 2 years of days, the king sent the prince of his tributes to the cities of Judah, and he came to Jerusalem with a great crowd. And he spoke peaceful words to them in deceitfulness, and they believed him. And he rushed upon the city suddenly, and he struck it with a great scourging, and he destroyed many of the people of Israel. So even he's being deceitful. Whenever he comes and to collect his tribute, meaning to collect like all the spoils of war and all the things that he is collecting from the people that they're giving him, and the taxes and everything, even then he's tricking them and destroying them. And he took the spoils of the city, and he burned it with fire, and he destroyed its houses and the walls around it, and they led away the women as captives, and they possessed the children and the cattle. And they built up the city of David with a great and strong wall and with strong towers, and it became a stronghold for them. So imagine like you have the city, and it has walls around it, but they are destroying everything and building up their own. Like they are taking the city to be their own city, to be their own place, and to be their own fortified city, like a strong city that they can then leverage and use. And they set up in that place a sinful people, wicked men, and together they grew strong in it. And they stored up weapons and provisions, and they gathered together the spoils of Jerusalem, and deposited them in that place, and they became a great snare. And this became a place of ambush against the sanctuary, and a diabolical evil in Israel. And they poured out innocent blood around the sanctuary, and they contaminated the sanctuary. And the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them, and the city became the dwelling place of outsiders. And she became a stranger to her own offspring, and her own children abandoned her. Her sanctuary was desolate, like a place of solitude. Her feast days were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into disgrace, her honors into nothing. Her shame was multiplied according to her glory, and her loftiness was turned into lamentation. And King Antiochus wrote to all his kingdom that all the people must be one, and that each one should relinquish his own law. Okay, so what do you think about what he's saying here?
He's just trying to make one government.
Yeah. What does it mean when he says that all the people must be one?
One.
The language as well.
To conform to Greek culture? Hmm.
Language.
Language? Right. So is that what brings unity? Like, how is it, like, because, you know, in the church, like, you know, we talk about how we want to be one. We want to be one, okay? And unity is a good thing. And even like here in the United States, like we talk about being united, we are the United States of America, right? What does it mean to be united?
Everybody come together as one.
Right, so in what way are we one? Like, even if you think about, okay, like,
Our uniqueness complements each other. Like, what this is talking about is homogeneity, which is like, well, it's a false homogeneity. But I mean, when you talk about the United States, every state is different and brings something different to the table, but allows us to come together as one country.
right.
And that's make it stronger. Whatever, when you are united,
Mm-hmm.
it makes this united stronger than if it's just different.
Okay, but here in this case, when he's talking about being one, he's talking about being forcibly one, right? So when you become forcibly, he's like forcing their culture on them.
It's gonna be dissent.
Is going to be dissent. And they're not going to really enjoy unity. I mean, if from maybe the outside it appears that there's some kind of superficial unity, but really deep down people are not accepting of this. And when you come and you destroy a person's religion and culture and history, and you do all this, and then you say, oh, well, it's because the people must be one, okay? And that each one should relinquish his own law. So what is implied in this is that, and remember, what is Antiochus' name? It means what?
Manifest of God.
Yeah, God manifest. So it's like he is believing himself to be God, okay? And he is the lawgiver. He is the one who is coming to decide for everyone what they should practice and what they should do. And he is more important than God because he wants them to discard the law that God has given them, and he becomes his own God. Now remember, like, the Greeks believed in gods. The Greeks believed, I mean, they had a mythology of their own, and yet, you know, he's coming to do this believing himself to be a god, okay? So that's an important thing for us to keep in mind, even like, you know, in the church, when we talk about the church as being one, but because the church is one doesn't mean that every person in the church necessarily speaks the same language. I mean, we have people in the church speaking different languages. And it doesn't mean that everything about us must be identical and that we have to do identical things, right? Or like identical things. So in what are the things that we have to be one in the sense of identical in, and what are the things that is not important to be one in, and how does that affect the church?
I think one in face, like we have to have like one face.
Okay.
One core dogma.
Hmm?
One core dogma, like the beliefs, the underlying not structure, like what defines the faith is the same. Actually, the structure can vary a little bit. As Bohemian would say, the economy.
The economy. Yeah. So the faith is one, the dogma is one, the things that we believe are one. So what can change?
Simple answers is in the first hour of the Agpeya, and the Ephesians 4. When it calls, there's one body and one spirit, just as you are called in one hope, for calling one Lord, one faith, and one baptism.
Okay. Yeah, which all represents like all the dogma and belief of the church. Because I mean, this is an issue that we run into now, like say in the Coptic Church. When we have a church that started in Egypt, and there was, you know, oneness in every way. There was oneness in language, oneness in culture, oneness in practice, oneness in history, oneness in everything, and of course, all of the faith was one. So when you have now a separation from the original culture of the church, and they're having to discover and figure out, okay, well, what is actually the oneness part of it? What does it mean to be one, and what doesn't have to be one for us to still be considered united? Similar to what happened in the early church, like with the Judaizers. So you have the Gentiles coming into the church, and you have the Jews also converting to Christianity, and you have completely different cultures How is it that they solved this problem?
Figured out what needed to be one and what didn't.
Right. And who decided that?
The disciples.
Right. The apostles decided. So one of the things that happens maybe in the church is individuals or groups of people or people in different countries or whatever it might be, look at this and they say, we decide that such and such should be the practice or such and such. I think in the American culture, such and such is unreasonable for people to do. And for that reason, it shouldn't be imposed on them. So we're going to make such concessions or such changes to the church. But actually, if every person did this according to their own understanding of what should be and what should not be, then we will have no oneness at all. I mean, everyone's going to do their own practice, do their own thing, and there's not going to be any unity, even among people in the same church. So the nice thing about the church and the way that the church dealt with the situation in Acts chapter 15 about the Gentiles is that the apostles are the ones that met together. The apostles came up with the solution, and then they disseminated that solution to the entire church, was essentially saying the Gentiles should not eat meat sacrificed with blood, and the Gentiles don't have to be circumcised. Okay? And so it was a decision that was made, that was a concession, okay, which helped them to discover something about themselves. And I think that's also kind of where we are in the church, is that we're discovering something. We're discovering how the faith that we have, which is the true faith, can be applied to other cultures. And it's a growing process, and it's something that maybe takes time to fully discover and understand. But what's very important is that not each person on their own decide that I'm going to go a particular direction or another. Like we discuss the issue, and the elders of the church and the bishops, they decide, okay, this is the direction that we're going to go, because we want to achieve a spirit of oneness. Okay, the spirit of oneness is more important than the appearance of oneness. Right here, they didn't have a spirit of oneness at all. Just because they build a sports arena in Jerusalem doesn't mean that now they have a Greek culture, and doesn't mean that this is the lifestyle that they have. This is something that's not going to change. Okay, they're going to fight against it. So we have to have a spirit of oneness, and we see that really beautifully in the early church. In the first few chapters of the book of Acts, we see that in the early church, they shared everything together. They sold all that they had and gave it to the church. They prayed for one another. They ate together. They prayed. Like, they did everything together. This spirit of oneness came because of the presence of Christ and the Holy Spirit in them, which would created the oneness, right? So the oneness comes through mutual love. And I think we see, again, I'll go back to our country. I mean, the United States of America, maybe at no other time except maybe the Civil War could we say that we were not united as maybe we are today. So like, being united is not just sharing a common set of laws, because I feel sometimes the only thing that people actually go to in our country is the legal system, right? As long as we're all doing legal things and everything is legal, but actually if our code of morality has devolved to just be, I'll do whatever is legal and whatever is legal is good, then we really are not treating each other with respect or goodness or with love or mercy, because the law doesn't say you have to be merciful. The law doesn't say you have to love. The law just says what are the external things that you do and do not do. But if you look in the early church had a genuine love for one another, not because they were told that the law required, for instance, that you must sell all that you have and give it to the church. It was something that the people wanted to do. It's something that came from their heart, and something that really united them in the bond of love, because one, it was voluntary. Two, it went above and beyond what was required, right? And so for a church to truly be one, like it has to be voluntary. It can't be something where people are being forced to do something. Right. Two, it has to go above, because love is above. Love is not something that can be codified. Love is not something that you can say, if you do 1, 2, 3, 4, it's love. Actually, if we find ourselves doing the minimum of anything, then it's very likely not love. It's compulsion. If somebody tells me, it's like when Christ was explaining to the people, he said, when one person tells you walk with him 1 mile, what do? You walk 2 miles. Because the first mile is not love. The first mile you are forced to do it. The second mile is love, right? So this is what in the church, like, that Christ is commanding us when he says to love one another. To love one another means not that I do the minimum required to one another. It means that I do above and beyond what is required. This is the way that I demonstrate love, and this is the way that we have unity. We have unity because we are united by a bond of love, not by a bond of language, not by a bond of culture, because all those things you can see in the early church, they were not uniform, they were not standard. They came from all over the world and all over the place. And all Gentiles consented according to the word of King Antiochus, and many out of Israel consented to his servitude, and they sacrificed to idols, and they polluted the Sabbath. Okay. Why here, when it says many consented to his servitude, why would someone consent to servitude?
Easier.
Easier than?
Standing up for what you believe in. I mean, defying all the power of the guy who runs the country. You know?
Yes. So you might consent out of fear. What's going to happen to me if I don't consent? You might consent because you think it's actually better. You know, there those people who made the first move to go and strike a deal with Antiochus among the Jews, like they believed that they were going to get something out of this, right? We're going to be the first ones to go, and then we're going to come back and become like emissaries of the king, and we're going to have some power or some position, and they're willing to compromise what they believe. So they felt it was good. It was good for them. Maybe they're going to benefit something. Maybe they don't care at all about their faith, and they think it really doesn't matter, and so they're just trying to do something that spares themselves. Okay. But I found it interesting that he's saying they consented to his servitude, because sometimes we consent to servitude, right, to different things or different ideas or different people. Like we consent to the idea of being under the yoke of and being controlled by something else. And even though we are slaves, we find ourselves consenting to it for various reasons. Can you guys think of situations maybe where we consent to be to servitude of something or someone? No? Sherry, you were saying something.
No.
No? You can't think of anything? Okay, how about the secular world? Okay? A lot of times we consent to servitude to the secular world when we feel embarrassed to express our faith openly, knowing that other people might look at us or point at us or criticize us. Right? This is an example of consenting to servitude. Because essentially we are saying, we believe that God is real and that we are children of God and that what we are practicing and what we believing is better and higher than anything else in the world. This is what we say we believe. This is what we talk about here in this building. Okay? But then when we go out, do we live according to that? Like that is actually the case? Or do we instead subject ourselves to the law of the world that directly contradicts what it is that we are saying? And I'm not saying that we start a revolution or anything. I'm just saying that we don't stand up and say anything. Like we don't push back against it because we're afraid to. We're afraid to say, you know what, I don't approve of homosexual union. I don't approve of it. You know, like today, if someone says something like that, you can be like stoned. Okay? So and it takes a lot of guts to do that. It takes a lot of faith to do that. And we ask ourselves, well, what's the harm in not doing it? I can still say inside myself, I don't agree with it. I'm not saying that I support it, but I'm not going to make a stand. I'm not going to say anything about it. And that's similar to these people here and the Jews when the Gentiles came against them. They said, okay, well, they're changing our culture. They're changing our society. I can't do anything about it, so I'm just not going to do anything. And one of the things I notice here in this book that's very interesting is the way the three groups of people respond. The three groups are the Jews that are the first to go and to make a deal. That's group number one. The second is the group of Jews that are just willing to be martyrs, meaning we're going to do what we're going to do. No one's going to tell us otherwise, and we're willing to die for it. That's group number two. Group number three is the Maccabees, the group that the whole book is named after. They are faithful Jews, but they were not the Jews that said, I'm just going to sit and do what I'm going to do and do nothing else, right? They're the group of Jews that decided to fight back. And what we find is God actually granted them like victory over their enemies. If all of the Jews in this book decided, all we're going to do is remain faithful and even be willing to be martyred for what we believe, the entire Jewish culture would have been wiped out. Because there was no one to stand and say, no, we're not gonna take this, right? And you look at many of the heroes in the Old Testament, somebody like David, for instance. David would be the last person to stand up and to say, you know what, I'm gonna stand up against Goliath, and that I'm gonna somehow victory over him, right? So there is this fine line between the faithful that are willing to be martyred and all they do is continue in their righteous and pious lifestyle until they're martyred, versus those who are maybe also willing to be martyred but are willing to fight as they're being martyred, right? Not because, and the fighting that they fight is not for personal,
Personal gain.
perseverance? Is it not preservation. Yeah, that's the word. Preservation. It's not for personal preservation. Like, the Maccabees are not fighting because they want to protect their money, or because they want to protect their land, or because they want to protect their family. They're trying to protect the entire Jewish nation, the entire history of the Jews. They're trying to protect that this is what God has established. How we can just let these enemies come and destroy the thing that God has established and do nothing else. So while definitely the first group is wrong, okay, the one that's going to go and like commiserate with the enemy and try to make a deal with them, the second group, of course, is not wrong. The second group are the ones that are willing to be martyred. But there's something about the third group, which is the focus of this book, that's very interesting. When do we actually stand up and do something versus when do we do nothing but continue doing righteous things? Like I'm going to continue going to the church, I'm going to continue praying, I'm going to continue believing in God and continue doing everything, but the whole world could be being destroyed around me and I'm just staying in the church doing my thing, okay? Versus the third group that said, you know what, we cannot tolerate what's happening around us, and so we have to make a positive action. We have to take a stand against what we believe. And I think that's one of the important lessons that we learn from this book, because you see that happening and you see how God blessed them and granted them victory over their enemies because they were willing to stand up for what they believed. And the king sent letters by the hand of messengers to Jerusalem and to all the cities of Judah that they should follow the law of the nations of the earth, which is the Greek law. And they should prohibit holocausts, which are sacrifices, and sacrifices and atonements to be made in the temple of God. So he's telling them you cannot offer sacrifice. Like, so you notice now he's going to go point by point. Like, he studied them. He knows them. He knows what they practice and what they do. And he's essentially going to go point by point in everything that they do, and he's going to undermine it, and he's going to destroy it, and he's going to mock it, and he's going to reverse it. And so it's a very calculated and pointed attack at them. And this is the same way that the world is. We sometimes, those who attended the lectures about the marketing of evil, okay, there's a book written called The Marketing of Evil. Essentially, the premise of this book is that evil is not random. Evil is not just random stuff that happens where people end up, believing in something that's wrong. Evil is calculating, and evil has a plan. Okay, and so here you can see the plan. You can see that he is saying, I'm going to frighten, intimidate, brainwash, attack all of the foundation of their faith, telling them to stop doing all the things that they're doing, so then their transformation can happen smoother and easier and quicker. Okay, so he's telling them, don't offer sacrifices, and they should prohibit the celebration of the Sabbath, meaning you cannot celebrate the Sabbath, and the solemn days, like the feast days and the fast days. And he ordered the holy places to be defiled, along with the holy people of Israel. Now, this is different than the Romans. The Romans had a different philosophy. The Romans had a philosophy of, as long as you are not attacking us and our society, you can live how you want to live. This is why in the New Testament you had Pharisees and Sadducees and the high priest, and they had synagogues, and they were praying and doing all this because the Romans didn't force this on them. The Greeks did. Okay, so in that sense, the Roman conquest that happened after this was much better news for the Jews than the Greeks, because the Greeks is trying to completely make them, they're Hellenizing them. They're making them completely Greek. And he orders altars to be built, and temples and idols, and he ordered the immolation of the flesh of swine and of unclean cattle, meaning the destruction and the sacrifice of the flesh of swine. Meaning why? Because he knows that it's unclean for them. He's trying to force them to sacrifice and to be in contact with that which he knows is defiling to them. and that they should leave their sons uncircumcised, and defile their souls with all that is unclean, and with abominations, so that they would forget the law, and would alter all the justifications of God, and that whoever would not act according to the word of King Antiochus should be put to death. Again, he's taking the place of God. According to all these words, he wrote to all his kingdom, and he appointed leaders over the people who would compel them to do these things. And these ordered the cities of Judah to sacrifice. And many from the people who had abandoned the law of the Lord were gathered together by them, and they committed evils upon the land, and they drove the people of Israel into hiding, into secret places of fugitives. So even the Israelites, who were not faithful to the laws of God, they turned against their brethren. They did what King Antiochus told them to do, and they turned against their brethren. And so all of the righteous people became fugitives. They had to start like in secret. They're hiding. They're practicing their faith in secret. On the 15th day of the month of Kislev, in the 145th year, King Antiochus set up the abominable idol of desolation on the altar of God, and they built altars throughout all the surrounding cities of Judah. This abomination of desolation, where do we hear about this elsewhere in the Bible? The book of Daniel again. So as we said in the beginning, the book of Daniel prophesied about the different kingdoms that were to come after him. He prophesied that the Greek Empire would destroy the Medo-Persian Empire. He prophesied that Alexander the Great would die and that 4 kingdoms would come after him, which one of the Seleucid Empire is the one we're talking about now, one of the 4. He also prophesied about the abomination of desolation. He said that the time will come where this abominable idol will be placed on the altar in the temple. Okay, and this has different fulfillments. One of the fulfillments is here, and it has other spiritual fulfillments as well. And they burned frankincense, and they sacrificed before the doors of houses and in the streets, and they cut up the books of the law of God and destroyed them with fire. And all those who were found with the books of the testament of the Lord, and whoever observed the law of the Lord, they butchered, according to the edict of the king. By their power they did these things to the people of Israel, as they were discovered in the cities month after month. This was a very, very long, prolonged persecution that happened. And more, many people would turn and say, okay, we can't live in like this, and maybe they would believe, or they would convert, and they would abandon their faith. And on the 25th day of the month they sacrificed on that altar, which was opposite the high altar. And the women who circumcised their sons were butchered, according to the order of King Antiochus. And they suspended the children by their necks in all their houses, and those who had circumcised them they butchered. And many of the people of Israel decided within themselves that they would not eat unclean things, and they chose to die rather than to be defiled with unclean foods. This is that second group that I'm talking about, right? These are the people that they didn't have any other recourse really, but to simply remain faithful and choose to be martyred for what they believe. And they were not willing to infringe upon the holy law of God, and they were butchered, and there was a very great wrath upon the people. So this is the end of the first chapter, okay? And I think it very clearly illustrates the magnitude of the problem and the destruction everywhere, and it kind of gives you this sense of like everything is just hopeless at this point. Like their society is destroyed, the temple is destroyed and plundered and desecrated, and all the people are being butchered and killed, and there doesn't seem to be any hope. In the next chapter, we begin to see this resistance movement start to happen, okay? And I think they should make a movie out of this book, because it's such a powerful kind of transition that happens from the destruction that they're experiencing, and then how that such a small group of people, how such a small family of people can begin a movement that's eventually going to retake everything again and drive out these Greeks from Israel. Any questions or comments about this chapter?
When you mentioned like the line between being the first group of Jews and the second group of Jews, but you said that there's a line that exists, but we didn't really talk about like how. So like I think in the church we've come to a very comfortable place. Like as youth, we're like, well, how do we answer these things in college? And the good answer we've come up with is, well, if I'm asked, I will be told my opinion. And so today we've taken it a step further and we're like, well, even if I'm not asked, at what point do I volunteer my opinion? And I don't know, could you give some sort of guideline?
So I mean, obviously we're not going to take up weapons and go and kill people or anything like that. Okay. So, but one question you can ask. So when we talk about the battle, okay, how is the battle waged in modern times? So again, we're not going to have a kind of war, and nor is that the right thing to do as Christians. What is the kind of battle that it would be the equivalent of what they're doing?
To insist about our point of view, like our faith. I mean, no matter situation we get exposed to, no matter what, and we try to affect. And instead, the people affect us. We affect the other people.
So there's definitely like the personal, right? So one is I have to preserve myself to remain righteous and pure and not to give into that. Okay, that's one. Two, I have to be able to do that publicly without fear, right? Even if I am punished for, socially or whichever way, right? Okay, that's one thing. What else?
So you were asking in what ways the war is being waged, and it's
What?
little nuanced things by lobbying and propaganda and passing laws and little cases.
But I'm saying, in what ways we should wage war?
I think it just boils down to choices, kind of like what you said. Every choice that we make has to be one that speaks for our God and not for, whether it's public or not, but like, just in the sense of like what we watch, what we listen to, what comes out of our mouths. Every choice that we make has to be made with the thought in mind that we represent our God.
Yes. I think that goes again to the personal, right? That's all about the personal, like what I personally believe and how do I personally affect others through my personal belief.
That's all group one of the Jews, right?
Yeah. To a large extent, it's group one. So what else?
Speak out against it.
Okay, speak out against it. So that goes more into to the active evangelism and talking out against it. Okay, so what does that ultimately lead? If you're gonna speak out against things, then you do what?
Service.
Service is one thing, yes. So we're gonna go and share what we believe to other people's, like as a church, doing service in different ways. That's definitely one way. What's another way? So in our society, when a group of people wants society as a whole to adopt what they believe.
They march.
Okay, marches
There's a
Lobbyists.
or speeches.
Lobbyists.
Lobbyist, yes. Actually, I know I'm not that is. We don't do it because maybe we feel like, well, one, we don't know how to do it, or we don't have the resources to do it, or we feel like it might not be beneficial or whatever. But when you really think about it, if you have a group that really does want to transform public opinion about something, in addition to all of the personal things, in addition to the service, in addition to that, let's say you have lobbyists, and let's say you are promoting, and what are you promoting? This would actually be a good way to have relationships with other Christians, right? Because for the most part, every Christian church, regardless of denomination or anything, is going to have very similar moral ideals that we would want to promote in the country, right? So imagine, and the Coptic Church is a part of these things, like the World Council of Churches and the National Council of Churches and different things. And, representatives from our church, they go and they meet with other churches and discuss different issues. But the idea is if we are not going to go and fight in this sense, there are people that feel very strongly about things that, are really not important. And they, I don't know, I'll give you my opinion. PETA, for instance, the animal rights. Okay, and we're not talking about animal rights, don't beat your dogs. We're talking about treat animals as though they are human beings. Okay, and they feel so strongly about this that they go and they lobby and they get money and they get politicians and all this stuff. Okay, I'm not saying whether right or wrong about that. I'm just saying if they're willing to do that for animals, okay, then maybe we have to evaluate what we are willing to do for our cause. You know, and I'm not saying, okay, we're going to tomorrow go to Washington with Sherry and just, go to the White House. But I'm just saying, what is it as a church that we can do more than we are doing to really be more engaged in the society on a personal level and on a church level? Okay, because there are other peoples that are winning. They are gaining ground. And I'm not saying PETA is going to transform society, but there are steps that happen that move people from where they are to a different kind of understanding, just because they hear more and more and more the opinions of others. So we can also present opinions, and we can present what we believe and present it in a correct way, because usually what happens when Christianity is discussed in the news or in wherever, it's discussed in a demonizing way, and it's discussed without understanding. Who are you talking about? The kind of people that we are seen to be, what people think that we are, is really not what we are at all. So who's going to be that voice to stand and say, no, this is not what we are? You know, so it's something to think about.
I was in this place when we have last fasting. My coworkers, they are Vietnamese, and they have food. They was asking about my food because it was always like fasting food, and like asking about why I don't eat meat and like this stuff. And was explaining that because I'm Christian and I'm doing that for blah blah blah. What you are? She said Buddha, and she was so excited to show me the Buddha's picture. And like she opened the Google to show it, and I saw like many pictures. And so like which one? Because they are different. She said they all. I said okay. And she asked me to show her my God and show her Jesus Christ picture. She said, "Oh yeah, is this one?" So like, that's all what you know.
Yeah.
Like I said, yeah, this one. But this is another picture. Like yeah, and this is for that. But I feel sorry for her because there's still people in this place. You know, they doesn't know anything about God. But they have these ideas inside, and you cannot change it, whatever you say or whatever you do. Like you acting good with them, your attitude is good, you try to explain whatever, but they just have something stuck in their head.
Yeah, man, I walk around with this cross everywhere, thinking that it would be clear that I'm a Christian. And sometimes when I go somewhere, like in a restaurant or something, people come to me, I order food, and they say, "Do you realize this has pork in it?" Because they think that I'm Muslim. Or I went to a soccer league with my son to play soccer, and it's a Christian soccer league. Okay? And when I'm there, the pastor or the coach comes to me and he says, "Are you okay with us teaching the Bible to your son?" So it's very common that people don't.
Yeah, when they just come here every time they ask like, I'm saying we are fasting. Are you Muslim? That's the first word. It's not like why is just your knowledge about just the Muslims they are fasting?
Because Muslims manage to like have this reputation of fasting for during Ramadan.
Well, they're much more vocal than we are. They're much more vocal.
And it's like a lot more visible form of fasting because they don't eat at all, you know? So like people don't look at us being vegan and
I
see
think
that as
because
fasting.
they show it more that we are fasting, like we are fasting, we are Allahumma inni sa'imtu, you know?
Yeah.
However,
But yeah,
we
I
have
think
Christ telling us like if you're fasting, don't show it.
yeah.
But Abuna, I noticed something also like Mariam said. People who didn't believe in God, they were very stubborn. Like some of them, I have met some of them. Like one of my managers, she's Hindu. She go to church, but I don't know if she baptized. But now she believe in God. Some of them, no matter they know they're wrong, they knew they're wrong. They knew that Jesus Christ, up to I see they answer some French Muslim people. Like it has been shocked me. Like one Muslim guy who was asking me what is the difference. He's from Pakistan originally. What is the difference between Jew and Christian? So my answer is, before I answered the other Hindu guy, he said, "Oh, Jew is believing in Messiah, which is Jesus," but basically answered the Muslim. And his answer convinced him, but they had something wrong, like I feel like kind of evil controlled their mind. They blind. They knew, but they didn't want to admit to.
It's hard for people to admit
Or
when they're wrong.
is scared.
Yeah, I
Or
mean,
something is super weird. Like I have been talking to a lot of people who is not believing God. They knew they're wrong. Because it does not make sense here in 21st century, like in America, like you're gonna still like worship like cow or worship idol. So they being, because education and they question themselves, like they, especially in Asia part, since there is no service over there by law, so they didn't know over there, and this is the reason they stayed over a million years on same belief and same culture and everything, and always there's a war between other religions, so they thinking no, religion is just for war and stuff like that. But when they come over here, and especially Baptist University, they do service a lot for this part of Asia. So they come over here and they're being educated and they know they're wrong and they know everything. But something weird, they being like scared to take a decision about it. It's weird, like.
I mean, try to put it in the reverse. Like if you are considering another religion, it's not easy to just make a decision. It takes time, and it's very complicated. It's more even than just what you believe. Sometimes you're just trying to overcome all the things that you've been taught when you were younger. Part of what we believe is not just because we believe it on the information and the facts or because it's true. Part of it is maybe because we grew up with it, so we have such an emotional attachment to it. And to make a decision to go against all of that, it's kind of like rejecting our childhood, rejecting our family, rejecting everything in order to believe. So people who come from other faiths to Christianity, it's a very, very big decision to make. And so, we should support them.
But consider me, like, I make search. Like, I'm glad that I do too much search concerning Islam, and I know everything. I like to deal, even language. I like to learn other people's culture, even history. And also even like any other worship against God, I'm glad to know, because this is part of the Bible. Like before I was Christian, but I wasn't know how people starting worship idolism and why it exists until now. Then I discovered that it's a part of the Bible in the Old Testament since million year. And whenever I compare the history and then the search on the Google, I figure out, yeah, that's what the Bible said. They have been year and year, they was worship idol and is exist until now during there is no service over there. So it's really enjoyable to know, and I end up by decision, yeah, it's Jesus Christ is really the true God, which is whatever I'm doing is the right thing. So I wonder how people didn't want to think about mind. Why they didn't compare history? Why they not scientists? Everything. I wonder. Like people didn't want to think.
No, it's just my opinion. Talking to people about subjects like this, almost everybody, 99% of people believe in God. Okay, and believe they are right, and the principle and whatever they're doing is right. We believe that we might be wrong. Okay, we might be so old-fashioned. But the problem is the word religion is not really emphasized anywhere right now. And it's a word that's considered
a bad word.
It's not right. Even in newspaper, we used to have a section called religion, now they call it beliefs. So the word religion is taken. So the biggest problem is what I call indifference. Okay? People tell you, what you're doing is great, but it's not for me. Okay? You believe in your God, I believe in my own God. So everybody gotta say believe in God. But the God is different.
Yeah.
The word they identify God is different. And we don't really understand the belief that we are incorrect. Our belief is, derived from centuries ago, and the world changed and we did not change, and that's incorrect. So we need to stand our grounds by telling them, well, this is what the apostles did, and we're following the footsteps of the apostles.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, let's pray.